The Panzerkampfwagen IV, PZKPFW-4, commonly known as the Panzer IV, was a German medium tank developed in the late 1930s and used extensively during the Second World War. The Panzer IV was the most numerous German tank and the second most numerous German armored fighting vehicle of the Second World War, with some 8,500 built. The Panzer IV chassis was used as the base for many other fighting vehicles, including the Sturmgeschütz IV assault gun, the Jagdpanzer IV tank destroyer, the Wirbelwind self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, and the Brummbär self-propelled gun. The Panzer IV saw service in all combat theaters involving Germany and was the only German tank to remain in continuous production throughout the war. The Panzer IV was originally designed for infantry support while the similar Panzer III would fight armored fighting vehicle. However, as the Germans faced a formidable T-34, the Panzer IV had more development potential with a larger turret ring to mount more powerful guns and took over the anti-tank role. The Panzer IV received various upgrades and design modifications, intended to counter new threats, extending its service life. The Panzer IV was partially succeeded by the Panther medium tank, which was introduced to counter the Soviet T-34, although the Panzer IV continued as a significant component of German armored formations to the end of the war. The Panzer IV was the most widely exported tank in German service, with around 300 sold to Finland, Romania, Spain and Bulgaria. After the war, Syria procured Panzer IVs from France and Czechoslovakia, which saw combat in the 1967 Six-Day War. The Panzer IV was the brainchild of the German general and innovative armored warfare theorist Heinz Guderian. In concept, it was intended to be a support tank for use against enemy anti-tank guns and fortifications. The Panzer IV was originally intended to be used only on a limited scale, so initially Krupp was its sole manufacturer. The Panzer IV was one of the most widely exported German tanks of the Second World War. The Panzer IV was the only German tank to remain in both production and combat throughout World War II, and measured over the entire war it comprised 30% of the Wehrmacht's total tank strength. Through the use of tactical radios and superior tactics, the Germans were able to outmaneuver and defeat French and British armor. However, Panzer IVs armed with the KWK 37-liter/24 75mm tank gun found it difficult to engage French tanks such as the Somme S-35 and Char B-1. The Somme S-35 had a maximum armor thickness of 55 mm, while the KWK 37-liter/24 could only penetrate 43 mm at a range of 700 meters. The British Matilda II was also heavily armored, with at least 70 mm of steel on the front end turret and a minimum of 65 mm on the sides, but were few in number. Although the Panzer IV was deployed to North Africa with the German Afrika Korps, until the longer gun variant began production, the tank was outperformed by the Panzer III with respect to armor penetration. Both the Panzer III and IV had difficulty in penetrating the British Matilda II's thick armor, while the Matilda's 40mm QF 2-pounder gun could knock out either German tank. The Matilda II's major disadvantage was its slow speed. By August 1942, Rommel had only received 27 Panzer IV F2s, armed with the L/43 gun, which he deployed to spearhead his armored offensives. The longer gun could penetrate all American and British tanks in theater at ranges of up to 1,500 meters, by that time the most heavily armored of which was the M3 Grant. Although more of these tanks arrived in North Africa between August and October 1942, their numbers were insignificant compared to the amount of materiel shipped to British forces. The Panzer IV also took part in the invasion of Yugoslavia and the invasion of Greece in early 1941. With the launching of Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941, the unanticipated appearance of the KV-1 and T-34 tanks prompted an upgrade of the Panzer IV's 75mm gun to a longer, high-velocity 75mm gun suitable for anti-tank use. This meant that it could now penetrate the T-34 at ranges of up to 1,200 meters at any angle. The Panzer IV continued to play an important role during operations in 1943, including at the Battle of Kursk. It is estimated that combat against Soviet forces accounted for 6,153 Panzer IVs, or about 75% of all Panzer IV losses during the war. Panzer IVs comprised around half of the available German tank strength on the Western Front prior to the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. Most of the 11 panzer divisions that saw action in Normandy initially contained an armored regiment of 1 battalion of Panzer IVs and another of Panthers, for a total of around 160 tanks, although Waffen-SS panzer divisions were generally larger and better equipped than their Heer counterparts. Regular upgrades to the Panzer IV had helped to maintain its reputation as a formidable opponent. The Bocage countryside in Normandy favored defense, and German tanks and anti-tank guns inflicted very heavy casualties on Allied armor during the Normandy campaign, despite the overwhelming Allied air superiority. German counterattacks were blunted in the face of Allied artillery, infantry-held anti-tank weapons, tank destroyers and anti-tank guns, as well as the ubiquitous fighter-bomber aircraft. The side-skirt armor could pre-detonate shape-charge anti-tank weapons such as the British Piat, but could be pulled away by rugged terrain. German tankers in all theaters were frustrated by the way these skirts were easily torn off when going through dense brush. It was not until July 1944 that American Shermans fitted with the 76mm gun M1 gun achieved a parity in firepower with the Panzer IV. By August 29, 1944, as the last surviving German troops of 5th Panzer Army and 7th Army began retreating towards Germany, the twin cataclysms of the Falaise Pocket and the Seine crossing cost the Wehrmacht dearly. Of the 2,300 tanks and assault guns it had committed to Normandy, including around 750 Panzer IVs, over 2,200 had been lost. Field Marshal Walter Model reported to Hitler that his panzer divisions had remaining, on average, 5 or 6 tanks each. During the winter of 1944-45, the Panzer IV was one of the most numerous tanks in the Ardennes offensive, where further heavy losses, as often due to fuel shortages as to enemy action, impaired major German armored operations in the West thereafter. After the war, they served as training tanks and one portrayed a Soviet KV-1 tank in the movie The Unknown Soldier in 1955. After 1945, Bulgaria incorporated its surviving Panzer IVs into defensive bunkers as gun points on its border with Turkey, along with Soviet T-34 turrets. This defensive line, known as the Crowley-Marko Line, remained in use until the fall of communism in 1989. By 1954, all German tanks in Romanian military service had been scrapped. While their numbers remain uncertain, Syria received around 60 panzers that were refurbished in France between 1950 and 1952, followed by 50 others purchased from Czechoslovakia in 1954, per the Czechoslovakia-Syria arms deal. Several of Syria's Panzer IVs were captured by the Israeli army and donated to the Yad Lashion Museum. The Off-Tank Museum in Danville, Virginia later traded a US M5 Stuart light tank to the Latrun Museum for one of the Czechoslovak origin Panzer IVs, which is now an exhibit there.